What's up, plant lovers? Devin is here, and today we're going to be talking about the money tree, or Pachira aquatica. Now, this is going to be a very definitive guide, everything that you need to know, probably more than you want to know, about growing these beautiful money trees. Stay tuned as we do a deep dive into the Pachira aquatica, the money tree. Now, of course, the money tree is beloved for its unique foliage that is very unusual. They're also beloved for being a long-lived, generally easy to grow houseplant. And they're native to Central and South America, and they're actually native to swampy areas of those regions, which hence the name Pachira aquatica. And in their wild native habitat, they can actually grow into 60-foot tall trees or even larger. And as they grow, their trunks get thicker. Their thick trunks actually act as water reservoirs for the plants. And hence you can see, they get very thick bulbous trunks over time as we grow them longer and longer. They will even produce really unique flowers. I've just seen photos of them. I've never seen the flowers in real life, but they're very unique. And they also produce chestnut-like nuts, which can then be grown forth. Now, why are they called the money tree? There's a lot of different, stories out there, but the myth that I've most commonly heard is there was a man impoverished and he was praying for wealth. And after he was done praying, he opened his eyes and saw a very unique tree. He then began to cultivate that tree. He found that they produced these wonderful chestnut-like nuts that would make more plants. And so he continued to cultivate them, sell them, and that's how he found his wealth. And that's one of the myths behind the money tree name. Now, in terms of general care, I find them to be very easy and adaptable. I've grown them this was the very first houseplant I ever grew when I was back in college as a freshman in my dormitory. And this guy over here has been in our family for 25 years. I find them to be very easy to grow and very adaptable. In particular, they're very reasonable when it comes to lighting. For those of us in the northern hemisphere, or actually in the southern hemisphere as well, they're perfect for east or western facing windows. They don't need to hog all the bright southern exposed window real estate in your home. But if you do want to grow them in a slightly darker area, there's a couple things you can do. You can, number one, add a grow light that will give them a little bit additional supplementary lighting. Or if possible, you can grow them in a really nice, bright, southern facing window and allow them to have really nice, fleshed out growth, and then move them to a little shadier area, and you can kind of go back and forth, and that tends to do all right. For this big guy, I actually keep him in a rather shady kind of area of our living room, but over the summertime, I have this guy, I keep him outside. This guy, I keep him in a nice, bright, southern-facing window where they are allowed to explode in their growth. We'll talk more about putting them outside in a little bit. Next, let's talk about watering. So yes, I mentioned they come from swampy areas, which can be a little bit counterintuitive. They might think they want to be wet all the time. As a matter of fact, they like to be watered and then allowed to really dry out completely before you water them the very next time. And so what that tells us is that we really need to give them a very fast draining soil mix. I'll buy a bag of houseplant potting mix and I'll do 3 parts of that with 1 part of perlite, and then it creates a really nice free draining mix that allows them to utilize the water as they need, and then any excess water is eliminated, and then we empty any of that water that might be in the tray out so that it's not sitting in water. It is imperative that we err on the side of drier rather than wetter. Typically, when I see a money tree failing, it's due to being waterlogged or remaining too wet for too long in a cool condition. We don't want them to have that. We want them to dry quickly, easily, and actually remain dry for a while before we water it again. So in the summertime, that might be watering them once every 7 to 10 days. In the wintertime, that could be once every 2 weeks or so. So if you do find that your money tree is staying too wet for too long, there's 2 things you can do. You can either increase the amount of light. So by providing it more light, it will utilize that water more quickly, or obviously decrease the amount or frequency of water that you're giving it. Just maybe give it less water next time. All right, so now let's talk about containers. I find that these plants do best when they're allowed to be root bound. When they're root bound, that basically means that the roots are growing all the way around our containers. And what that allows to happen, it allows for a quick uptake of water, any excess water to drain away so that it can remain dry. This is going to allow it to remain healthy and really produce an expedited growth. So it's imperative that we don't plant small little plants in large containers where they're swimming in soil. They want to be root bound, and once they are root bound, we can allow them to remain root bound in a small container or gradually upsize to the next pot. Now I'll show you guys how to repot this here in a second. Now I like to use my family's blend of Roberta's Bounty. This is just a pretty all-purpose fertilizer, and I'll use this once a month during the summer months each year. So this is really easy to use. You can find a link to this in the product description below if you need some new fertilizer. You can use it on indoor plants and outdoor plants, even veggies, things like that. So it's a pretty nice all-purpose blend. So one of the things that you'll notice is that as these grow bigger and mature in their size and in their stature, they will produce some yellow leaves. And that doesn't mean that it's dying. It's simply the fact that they're producing new foliage, so they got to release some of the old foliage. And that's simply a part of the process. So just remove yellowing leaves like that as they come. If you find that a whole host of leaves have turned yellow all at one time, something like that, that's a different problem. It could be a variety of different reasons. So that's different. But if you just have a couple here and there that are turning yellow while your plant is growing, normally, a-okay. All right, so let's take a look at this braid. So I always find that it's easiest to start with a plant that's already braided, and we can just help foster that braid and allow it to continue growing in that braided fashion rather than trying to braid them ourselves from nothing. That's much more involved. So as you can see, this guy is beautifully braided. Now you can see where the new growth is occurring and the old growth is darkened. When they start to darken like this, it becomes much more challenging and less manageable to actually continue that braid. So you really need to stay on top of it as your plant is growing to help keep that braid intact. And as possible, you just simply braid it like you would, hair. Keeping that braid intact. I'm not doing a great job. This is not my forte. And then simply using like a twist tie or a pipe cleaner to hold it intact so that as it grows, this part will actually just kind of stay really nice intact. And then once we get a little bit more growth, then we can just simply keep moving it up slowly but surely. So if you let it grow out of that braid for a long time, it can be very challenging to bring it back into that braid. So just be aware. All right, guys, so now I'm going to show you guys how to quickly repot them. As you pop it out of the original container, it should be much more root bound than this. You can see there's just a small outline of roots growing around. It should be much more rooty around the edges before you repot them. So if you pop it out and it looks like this, simply leave it in this container and continue growing it in the grower's pot or whatever pot you may be growing it in until you can see much more root material around the outside. I'll show you what root bound looks like here in a second with this big plant. But just for the sake of the video, I will show you how to quickly repot it. So in terms of the next size container, you really want to pick something that's simply about half of an inch larger around each side. So you can see it's really only half an inch wider here, half an inch wider all the way around. So anything more than that, it's going to end up swimming in too much soil. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and fill up that base about halfway. Pop it out. You can just gently break those roots up a little bit. You don't need to do it too much. That looks a little bit high. Backfill it with a little bit more soil. Try to remove any air pockets as possible with your fingers, just like that. And then put a nice little drip tray underneath. And we'll give it a nice solid watering. And then we're going to put it in a nice bright area of the home. And we're going to allow this to totally dry out before we water it again. Just simply, you can visually see the soil is dry, or use your finger, put it about half an inch underneath the top of that soil, and if it comes out and it's dry, then you can water it again. All right, so now let's talk about how we can get thick, trunks like this. You see how big these guys are? So there's a few things that we can do to really encourage that sort of growth. Of course, the number one thing is time. This plant is 25 years old. So the longer you grow your plant, the more opportunity it has to produce a thicker trunk. Now, the next thing that you want to think about is putting them outside in the summertime. Like all of our houseplants, any houseplant that you really want to grow like extra quickly, put it outside in the summertime. As long as those nights are above 45 degrees Fahrenheit, leave them outside. Now, I left this guy outside all summertime on my covered front patio that is on the north side of my home. It didn't get any direct sunlight and it absolutely flourished. Now, one of the best things that we can do to rejuvenate our money trees as they're growing is to actually put them outside, and at the very beginning of summer is to simply cut back all of that foliage all the way. Here you can see exactly where I cut them back, and I did this around May 15th earlier this summertime, and by September 1st the tree was fully fleshed out, the trunk had grown a little bit thicker, it absolutely looked so healthy and so happy. So that is one thing that you can do if your money tree is flailing and doesn't look good. Simply put it outside, cut it back, put it in a bright location. Could get as much as 1, maybe 2 hours of morning sunlight that you would acclimate it to gradually at the beginning of the summertime, or just simply out of any direct sunlight will be perfect. Now, the next thing that you need to do is make sure as your plants grow, any growth that occurs along the base of your plant to remove those small growths. You want to have all of the energy focused into the trunk and not into small growths around the side. And the last thing that we can do to really encourage a thicker trunk is to actually root prune our plants. We can do this about every 3 years, and that really helps it. Now, let me show you guys. So I have this big old plant. It's growing in a cash pot, growing in this thing inside here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to root prune this, and then I'm going to pot it up into a container that's just slightly bigger. Remember what I said, when you repot them, you want to put it in a container that's just slightly bigger. So this is only about 1/2 inch bigger on each side, and it still fits in that nice ceramic pot. So it makes it nice and convenient. Oh, but this guy is so root bound, I have to actually use some shears to cut this pot. So you'll see here in a second what root bound really looks like. All right, you can see that roots going all the way around. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove those. We're gonna cut those off, and it's gonna regenerate our plant. It's gonna allow it to create new growth, new fresh roots, and that's gonna help to create a thicker trunk and also probably help it to grow taller. All right, so what you wanna do, you wanna get a nice serrated knife and just be careful laying it on its side. I probably broke a couple leaves, but who cares? It's gonna grow really nicely now. So we're really just gonna remove the bottom like 1.5 to 2 inches. You can see they have a really thick root right here, so we don't wanna cut that, but all these smaller roots is gonna be okay. You may need to ask for some assistance from someone that you love, and my wife is gonna come help me right now. I need you to hold this plant for me so it doesn't move. You see this kind of thick root coming right here? I'm not going to cut that, but I will cut just at the bottom of it. All right, looks like a frisbee of pure roots. Well, I think that looks pretty good for the root prune. All right, so then of course we need to repot it, and I have this nice pot, and I've put a little bit of soil in the base. Let's see how it fits. All right, I think it fits okay. Then you want to, of course, backfill the rest of the container with more soil. It's really important that you don't allow any air pockets to remain where there's no soil on exposed roots. That would provide a bad environment for those roots. And then once you have it repotted with the soil, you want to give it a nice deep watering, and that's going to help all of that new soil to kind of settle in, and it will expose if there is a need for more soil. If, you know, once you water it, some of that soil will move down and fill in those air pockets, and then you'll see kind of the soil line go down a little bit. And just run your fingers around the edges. And if that soil line has in fact gone down, that is your cue to top it off. All right, that was pretty messy, but I think it was a success. Whoa. It's Big Mama. I think it looks pretty good. And with that, now you know just about everything you need to know about the money tree. I was going to include propagation in this video, but it was just getting too long, so I decided I'll make an entirely separate video all about propagating our money trees. Please make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. We're bringing new plant-related content every single week. And if you subscribe, consider clicking that little bell icon so that you can be notified when our new videos are released, including the future video about how to propagate these beautiful plants. Anyways, thank you for joining me here on Plant Vibrations. I'll catch you soon. Ciao.